بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين.
Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, and Jummah Mubarak to one and all. Thank you for the invitation to present the Friday Nasiha to tell you what my recently published book is all about. By way of introduction, I will provide a brief explanatory context. Then I will tell you why I wrote the book and what its main argument is about. And assuming that the audience is a mixture of young and old people, I provide a simple summary of my book, which I think necessary, given that most of the listeners may not as yet have read my book. And finally, I provide a few conclusionary remarks. In this lecture, I focus on 6 main characters. They are 2 high-profile Indonesian political exiles named Shaykh Yusuf of Makasser and the Raja or King of Tambora. Makassar and Tambora refer to places in Indonesia. They were both sent to the Cape from Indonesia during a period of Dutch occupation of both countries in the late 1600s. 2 father and son Dutch governors at the Cape at the time, Simon van der Stel and Willem Adrian van der Stel, who succeeded his father as governor. 2 Dutch priests, one named Reverend Kelden, who was sent by the Dutch to preach Christianity at the Cape, and the other, named Reverend Francois Valentine, was sent by the Dutch to preach Christianity in Indonesia. At the time, the Cape was a midway refreshment station. People stopped here on their way to and from Indonesia and the Netherlands. I refer to one such stopover visit at the Cape by Reverend Valentine in 1705. I refer to the Malay language being spoken because at the time of Dutch occupation, Malaysia and Indonesia both form part of the Malay-Indonesian archipelago called the East Indies. However, both Shaykh Yusuf and the Raja came from Indonesia and not modern Malaysia. My book is titled The Mystery of the Apostasy of Shaykh Yusuf of Makasser's Alleged Grandchildren, the Children of the Raja of Tambora. In simple terms, apostasy means becoming murtad, or when a Muslim leaves Islam and converts to another religion like Christianity. Why did I write the book? My book deals with what we metaphorically call an elephant in the room, which is what we would refer to when we talk about a controversial topic or a sensitive issue that is known about but no one wants to mention or discuss because it is embarrassing and makes some of them uncomfortable. So they pretend that they can't see the elephant, which is a big animal normally found outdoors, even if it can now obviously be seen in an enclosed space like a room. What is the elephant in the room or sensitive topic in my book? In a nutshell, the controversial issue is that during a period of Dutch rule of both countries, when Shaykh Yusuf of Makasser and the Raja or the King of Tambora were sent to the Cape from Indonesia as political exiles, the Raja got married to Shaykh Yusuf's daughter, and thereafter the Raja's children, who are therefore now assumed to be the Sheikh's grandchildren, converted to Christianity and married Christian spouses. While the Raja and his wife remained Muslim until they both died at the Cape, it is true that the conversions and all the marriages of the Raja's children did take place. Although some local ulama at the Cape are aware of these conversions, many are not. Many local Muslims may therefore also not be aware of it. Now, there is one central point or argument that runs throughout my book. My book offers an alternative view on whether it was Shaykh Yusuf's grandchildren that converted to Christianity at the Cape. I come to what I believe is a plausible conclusion that It was highly unlikely that the woman who was married to the Raja was the biological daughter of Shaykh Yusuf. For this reason, it was, in all probability, not Shaykh Yusuf's grandchildren that converted to Christianity at the Cape, and the Raja was therefore also not his son-in-law. I argue that the stigma of conversion tainting the history and good name of Shaykh Yusuf was therefore a colonially perpetrated myth. In writing my book, I re-examine, decolonize, and reinsert the experiences of Shaykh Yusuf and the Raja's family that I believe have been sidelined in the process of colonial domination by the Dutch. Now I will give you a broad summary of the 6 personalities I mentioned earlier and how their stay at the Cape overlapped with each other. Some 327 years ago, and during the time that Simon van der Stel was the Dutch governor at the Cape, Shaykh Yusuf arrived at the Cape in 1694 at the age of 67. By then he had already spent 10 years in exile in Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka. Since Shaykh Yusuf was regarded as a hero in his country, the Dutch reckoned that he would pose even less of a threat if he was moved further away from Indonesia than Sri Lanka, and the Cape was ideal because it was situated at the tip of Africa. With Shaykh Yusuf came a large entourage of 49 people, which included family, his wives, his children and grandchildren, his relatives, his male and female friends, which included a few imams and slaves. His was the only recorded entourage to have arrived with a political exile in such large numbers at the Cape. Many of them were also intermarried, and as a result, their numbers grew even bigger during their stay at the Cape, so that by the time they left the Cape for Indonesia, they were 60 in number. When they first arrived, they stayed at the castle built by Jan van Riebeeck in Cape Town. However, this was impractical because of the large number. The Dutch then housed and held Shaykh Yusuf and his entourage in isolation on one of the VOC or the Dutch East India Company properties at a place now called Makasser in Fora, which is named after Makassar, his place of birth in Indonesia. At the time, Makassar was deemed to be far away from central Cape Town because it could take a whole day's journey by horse and cart. Shaykh Yusuf died at the Cape in 1699, some 5 years after he arrived. Shaykh Yusuf, his main wife at the Cape, who was the daughter of a sultan, and some of the relatives who came with him were members of Indonesian royal families with much political influence. So when he died, their royal connections wanted his entourage to come back to Indonesia. The Dutch were only too happy to send them back because, given their large numbers, it was proving very expensive to maintain them. There was only one problem. Shaykh Yusuf was a hero in his country, and therefore he was still deemed to be a threat for the Dutch even as a dead man. The Dutch, fearing a revolt by his people on their return therefore wanted only the women and their children below the age of 6 years in his entourage to leave the Cape, but not his older sons, etc. However, his main wife was adamant. Either the whole family and entourage go as a unit or they will all stay. Many letters were written in Dutch to and from the Cape to the Netherlands about this issue. A further 5 years would therefore pass before the Dutch allowed everyone to leave in 1704. The Indonesian family wanted his bodily remains back, and the Dutch indicated that they would turn a blind eye if the family wanted to dig it up and take it back with them. We cannot therefore say for sure that they did, but besides Shaykh Yusuf's kramat located in Fora, it does have further burial sites in Indonesia. What we do know for sure, however, is that the Shaykh Yusuf's family stayed at the Cape for a total of 10 years, and that the Shaykh Yusuf was definitely buried here for 5 years after he died. There was no freedom of religion at the Cape during this time. It was also strictly forbidden, by penalty of death, to openly or publicly practice and preach Islam, or for non-Muslims to convert to Islam. However, the same penalty did not apply to conversions to Christianity. Although he was not among the first Muslims to have arrived at the Cape, the Sheikh is deemed to be one of the founding fathers and a reviver of Islam at the Cape. This is not surprising because at the time of his arrival, some 300 years ago, he was among the most learned persons at the Cape, including among the Dutch elite. He was a man who was a Sufi saint of many orders or tariqas, a Hafiz of the Quran, an alim and expert in Shafi jurisprudence, who had studied Islamic law or Sharia in many countries. He was an author of many books, and moreover, he was already a Haji at the early age of 27 or 28. This was already some 157 years before the first Muslim from the Cape would perform the Hajj or the pilgrimage. However, the laws in place at the Cape meant that he could not preach Islam to others without facing a death penalty. Now, 4 months before Shaykh Yusuf died in 1699 at the age of 73, a very young Dutch reverend, Petrus Calden, who was appointed by the Dutch to preach at the Cape as a minister of the Dutch Reformed Church, moved into a farm called Zandvliet, which was situated next door to the VOC property where Shaykh Yusuf lived. So Calden and Shaykh Yusuf were then neighbors for this 4 months. So Calden at the time was 29 years old and therefore less than half of Shaykh Yusuf's age. The late Mona Yusuf Karan gave a Maulid lecture on Shaykh Yusuf at the Nurul Latif Mosque in Fora. Maulana was 78 years old at the time, and in his lecture he said very passionately in Afrikaans that the Reverend Calden, Shaykh Yusuf's neighbor, had a hope in hell, or a hell of a hope, if he thought he could convert Shaykh Yusuf to Christianity. Reverend Calden was actually later dismissed from his post because of dishonesty. Now, a few years after the arrival of the Sheikh in 1694, another Indonesian exile, the Raja of the Kingdom of Tambora, arrived here in 1698. It is claimed by local historians that the Raja married one of Shaykh Yusuf's daughters at the time, daughters at the Cape, soon after his arrival and shortly before the Sheikh passed away in 1699. So in the same year, in 99, Simon van der Stel's son, Willem Adrian van der Stel, succeeded his father as Dutch governor at the Cape. By 1705, the Raja and his wife, who lived at the Governor Willem Adrian van der Stel's new residence called Vergelegen, which means situated far away in Stellenbosch, and which is still in existence today. Vergelegen is not too far from Fora, where Shaykh Yusuf lived, but they were both held in isolation, which meant that they could not have contact with each other. Now, it is interesting just how the story that the Raja was married to the Sheikh's daughter actually originated. In 1705, another very young Dutch Reverend Francois Valentine, who was then 39 years old and who was employed by the Dutch to preach in Indonesia, visited the Cape for 39 days while on his way to Indonesia from the Netherlands after a long absence of 10 years from Indonesia. The Cape at the time was used as a refreshment station by the Dutch. During these 39 days, Valentine visits his Cape counterpart, the Reverend Calden, Shaykh Yusuf's neighbor, at his farm Zandvliet for 8 days. Calden was now 35 years old. Remember, by this time the Sheikh had died and his family had left in 1704. During his stay in 1705, Valentine sees a simple grave of Shaykh Yusuf made up of stones. Thereafter, he visits Vergelegen for 1 day on the invitation of Governor Adrian van der Stel. There, he is surprised to meet the Raja, who was then also 35 years old, and his wife, some 26 years old. And Valentine mentions that she, the Raja's wife, had followed him, the Raja, out of love for him, that he, Valentine, spoke with them in the Malay language, and that the governor was surprised that he spoke the Malay language so well, despite having been absent from Indonesia for so long. Valentine also mentions that he saw the Raja writing out the Quran very neatly as a gift for the governor, Willem van der Stel. This would be the first Quran written in South Africa, already some 75 years before Tuan Guru would later also do so. Although the Raja and his wife would have had 2 children by then, Valentine makes no mention of them. How do we know all of this? Valentine wrote 2 books in the Dutch language. One was a travel diary and the other a book on the VOC history. Both books were published and translated into English. In both books, he mentions his 1705 visit to Calden, to Shaykh Yusuf's grave, and to the governor's estate Vergelegen, where he had met the Tamboras. However, the 2 accounts differ from each other, and the one book contains more detail than the other. The late Maulana Taha Karan the son of the late Maulana Yusuf Karan, who, like his father, also had an interest in Shaykh Yusuf, shared a copy of Valentine's travel diary with me. We studied these passages and interpreted the fact that the Raja's wife had followed him out of love for him to mean that she was already married to the Raja in Indonesia before he was exiled to the Cape. In his travel diary, Valentine doesn't mention the Raja's wife by name, nor does he draw any association between the Raja, his wife, and the Shaykh Yusuf, whose grave he had recently visited. Nor do the couple inquire after the Sheikh's family. Like Shaykh Yusuf's wife, the Raja had requested permission from the Dutch to leave the Cape with Shaykh Yusuf's entourage in 1704, but his request was denied. English translations of the official Dutch records in question make it clear that although the Raja may have pretended to be, he was deemed not to be related to Shaykh Yusuf's family. It seemed that he wanted to pass off his wife, who was possibly also from Makasser, and the two children as being part of the Sheikh's entourage without the Dutch catching on, but the Dutch appeared to be too wise for him. In 1708, both Reverend Kelden, Shaykh Yusuf's neighbor, and the governor Adrian van der Stel are dismissed from their posts for corruption and bad behavior and thereafter returned to Holland. The Raja himself is also pardoned in 1710 and returns to Indonesia with his family. Unfortunately for him, he is re-exiled back to the Cape in 1714, and his is the only record of such a repeat of political exile. He died in 1719 at the Cape at the age of 49. Until he died, he tried to return to Indonesia but was unsuccessful. A year later, in 1720, after his death, his wife, then aged 41, pleading dire poverty, requested to go back to Indonesia with her 5 children, who then ranged from ages 21 to 4 years old. So they acquired 3 more children in the process. However, unlike the petition of Shaykh Yusuf's wife, who was eventually allowed to go home with her family, the petition of the Raja's wife was denied. Starting soon thereafter, all the Raja's children eventually converted to Christianity and married Christian spouses. The oldest son, then aged 22, was the first to be baptized in 1721, a year after his mother's request to go home was denied. In 1714, Valentine returned from Indonesia back to the Netherlands for good. Valentine's travel diary and book were both published in 1726, shortly before his death in 1727 at the age of 61. Now, these 2 books are considered by some local Muslim historians as primary sources of early Cape history. To compare, as Muslims, we regard the Quran and Sunnah as primary sources of Islam. Now, in his book, Valentine refers to the same 1705 visit mentioned in his travel diary, referring to Kelden at Zandvliet, his visit to Shaykh Yusuf's grave there, and his visit with the governor to Vergelegen, where he met the Tamboras. What is different is that his book, unlike his travel diary, now suddenly contains a name for the Raja's wife, and he writes that further that he was told that she was Shaykh Yusuf's daughter. Valentine gives no indication who gave him that information. Although Cape records indicate that the Raja's wife was called by 2 further names, the VOC official list of names of Shaykh Yusuf's daughters who arrived with him at the Cape contained none of these 3 names, which indicate to me that it could not be proved that the Raja's wife was the Sheikh's daughter. 156 years later, in 1861, during a period of Dutch colonization of the Cape, a British woman called Lady Duff Gordon, during a visit to the Cape, is deemed to have perpetuated what was a hearsay rumor that the Raja's wife was the Sheikh's daughter in her travel diary, based on third-hand, unofficial information supplied to her by a Dr. Abdurrahman. So, we have second-hand information related to Valentine and recorded in his book during a period of Dutch colonization, and third-hand, hearsay information based on speculation rather than fact, recorded in another travelogue during a period of British colonization, neither of which to my mind can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this is a classic case of what we call the emperor has no clothes. And this is an idiomatic saying derived from a fairy tale, which means that something is widely accepted as true because of an unwillingness to criticize or challenge it, or to avoid being seen as going against popular opinion. The information of a Dutch and a British traveller on the Raja and the Sheikh is widely accepted as true by local scholars without much criticism or questioning of these popular opinions. I aver that their evidence needs to be treated most carefully and not accepted as is or footsteps, as we would say in law, because of its clear and hidden defects. I point out in my book that Valentine was a mortal man, a bird of passage who passed through the Cape without staying for long. There are several discrepancies between passages in his travelogue and his book, referring to the same events and dates, which suggest that he was drawing on memory in his travelogue or referring back to his travelogue when writing his book, innocent of any foreknowledge that some 3 centuries later his words would be so carefully and closely interrogated. The fact that he was himself also busy with the translation of the Christian Bible into the Malay language may be why he so vividly remembered the Raja's writing out of the Quran at the governor's estate. However, Valentine's reputation as a writer was not above reproach. He is reputed to be a plagiarist and a manuscript thief. It is claimed that most of the materials in Valentine's book was copied from other sources without acknowledging the authors, and that his translation of the Bible was actually done by someone else. After that person died, Valentine opportunistically passed it off as his own. Moreover, by today's standards, Valentine would be classified as nothing short of a racist. Now, in his book, in the passage in which he describes his visit to Reverend Calden in 1705, he refers to Hottentots as the most savage, stupid, and filthy heathens I had ever met. Now, while I understand and accept that conversions do take place even today in the best of families, as it did even during the time of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, here we are talking of the tarnishing of the reputation of Shaykh Yusuf, who at the time was among the most learned persons at the Cape. Now, in conclusion, the story of Shaykh Yusuf and the Raja is relevant to local Muslims and Indonesians because it forms part of our South African Muslim heritage. However, it is also a story that all South Africans should know about. Why do I say that? I say that because ultimately, to know your future, you must know your past. I believe that Shaykh Yusuf left no living descendants at the Cape. However, the Raja did leave behind descendants at the Cape. Today, the descendants of the Christian marriages of the Raja's children can be traced to Indonesian, German, Dutch, French Huguenot, and local Afrikaner families, although many may not even be aware of the Muslim origins of their families. I hope, inshallah, that my book will go a long way towards eradicating the taint of apostasy linked to Shaykh Yusuf's good name and standing. Shukran, and thank you for listening.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم اغفر لهم وارحمهم وعافهم واعف عنهم وأكرم نزلهم ووسع مدخلهم واغسلهم بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقهم من الخطايا كما ينكى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس اللهم لا تحرمنا أجرهم ولا تفتنا بعدهم واغفر لنا ولهم وللمسلمين أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.